Well, welcome as we celebrate this special time together. And I just want to talk a little bit about our gospel lesson today. You know, one of the common mistakes that priests make when they first get out of seminary is getting up and wanting to tell you all the stuff that they learned in seminary. Like, that gets old really quick. And once you've been sitting in a pew for a little while, you're kind of like, okay, Father, that's great that you know all that stuff. And you can always spot a first-year priest by how much Greek and Hebrew they try to inject into their preaching on Sunday morning, which you care about, not even a little bit. But every once in a while, there is a word that comes along that makes it a little bit different, a little important for us to pay attention to. And this morning is one of those Gospels that when we read it in English, we miss some of the nuance, some of the points that are going on. And this exchange between Jesus and Nicodemus is one of those. As you hear the translation this morning from the translation we use at Mass on Sundays, the New Revised Standard Version, we hear Jesus telling Nicodemus that you need to be born from above. Now, that's a term that may be a little more familiar to you from some other translations where Jesus tells Nicodemus that you need to be born again. That's a little more familiar to us because we've heard the phrase being a born-again Christian. Now, that means different things to different people depending on what faith tradition you're coming out of. But the translation here probably better suits born from above. Now, when I was in seminary learning all this Greek to share with everybody, we had one semester of Latin. And my Latin class was taught at St. Paul's Seminary, just over on Noblestown Road, by a nun named Sister Marie Bykowski. Now, Sister Marie was a lovely, lovely woman. She was also very, very big. Now, Sister Marie was, in my mind, she's like 6'7". That can't possibly be true, but in my head, she was that tall. And our little joke among seminarians was that it was expensive for her to get shoes because instead of shoes, she would get 2 Volkswagens with sunroofs and just put her feet in them. Now, Sister Marie was a very kind person, and there's probably no harder audience in the world than trying to teach a bunch of seminarians Latin, especially when none of us had had it before. And so she had this very kind way of correcting us. She would say, better would be. Now, she would say that no matter whether you just got really close or whether you were really, really far away. I remember one translation, she put some Latin up on the board and she said, Sean, can you translate this? And I said, the dog is sleeping. She said, better would be the man is in the house. Like nothing. I was not even close to it. Which is funny because after becoming Episcopalian, folks will always say, well, Father, you were Roman Catholic, so you know lots of Latin, right? Wrong. It really wasn't much of an emphasis by the time I started going to school. But it always kind of stuck with me, Sister Marie and her kindness. It really kind of reminds me, I think, what Jesus is trying to teach us about when he says we should be people that are born from above. We should be people that live our lives a little differently than folks who may not understand the importance of what God has called us to be. Now, it gets a little cryptic and weird, but think of it this way. Have you ever tried to describe the Grand Canyon to someone who has never been there? It's not easy to do, right? It's like a really big hole in the ground, right? And even if you show people pictures when you've been there, you lose depth of field, so you just have no sense of the vastness of this canyon. It's something you have to see to understand. Another thing like that might be an ocean over the sunrise. One of my favorite things in the world is watching the sunrise over the eastern coast of our country. A little trip to the beach and watching that sunrise is something that's always been very special to my wife and I. Can you imagine trying to describe that to someone who's never seen the ocean before? Some things you have to see with your own eyes to understand. And I think Jesus' teaching about being people who are born from above, I could get up here and talk about it all morning long, but it's something you have to see in action to understand. And I think all of us here this morning have been blessed in our lives to have people who have shown us what it means to be born from above. We've had people in our lives that have shown us what it means to choose a good path over one that is selfish and self-focused. All right, I've got a little quiz for the scouts this morning. Now, you guys are really good at the scout oath and the scout law, right? I've been to Eagle Courts of Honor. I know you guys have this down. But it's really hard. It's like trying to recite the Ten Commandments. What happens if you jump right into the middle? What is the sixth point of the scout law? Kind, yes! Yep, but you have to do it in your head, right? It's hard to jump right to it. You have to go, da, 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 da. A scout is kind. And I think the scout law does a nice way of cutting to the heart of things and getting us to the point of what this gospel is about this morning. Because it isn't easy being kind, is it? As I look to some of our younger people that are here in church this morning, sometimes siblings can be a special test of our kindness, right? And that was true for me as well. Now that I'm all grown up, and actually a little more than grown up, and actually kind of old, my brother and I are like the best of friends. I love that guy. He's so wonderful. It was a little less so when we were younger. Probably about the time I was about 10 and he was about 6, we had to be separated constantly because we were at each other's throats without end. And you know how this happens. It happens when we're kids, but it happens in our adult relationships too. When someone is unkind to us, when somebody does something that is not nice, that impacts our emotions, that make us angry, what is our first reaction? It speaks to our brokenness as human beings, but whenever someone is mean to us, our first response typically isn't, "Oh, God bless you," right? You know, when our sibling does something we're unhappy with, our first response isn't, "Well, that's okay, I love you, do whatever you want." That's not our reaction, nor is it our reaction in our adult lives. The same gut reaction happens, and it becomes more serious as we're adults because the choices we make have more consequences. But our gut reaction is to respond to anger with anger. Jesus might call that being born from below, or being a person of the earth. That's normal. That's the normal state of affairs for all of us. But when Jesus says we're called to be born from above, he's saying that something has to be different about the way we look in our lives, about the way we react when other people show us anger and acts of disrespect and unkindness. When my brother and I were in that period of fighting, we were in some argument about something which obviously turned into a wrestling match. Now, in the midst of that wrestling match, things got very heated, and my brother took a bottle of carpet fresh, you know that stuff, the powder that you put on your carpet and you vacuum up, but it never really leaves your carpet, so you have like sand in your carpet forever. He took a whole container of carpet fresh and threw it in my face. Now, I lucked out, because that carpet fresh hit me like in the chin, on the cheek, in my ear, but I pretended he got me square in the eyes. And so, what I did to return my brother's act of unkindness was pretend that I was blind. And I said to him, when Mom and Dad get home, they're probably going to send you away because you blinded me. My poor 6-year-old brother is crying and sobbing, "Please don't tell them, please don't tell them." And I said, "I have to tell them, I can't see, you did this to me." I let that go on for a while before I finally relented. In retrospect, it is amazing we're still friends all these years later. But that funny story shows what that reaction is like for us. And we do that in different ways in our workplaces, in our families, and among even our friends. The sixth point of the Scout Law is that we are to be kind. As we go through this coming week and as we continue our Lenten journey together, let's focus on kindness, to short-circuit that automatic reaction that returns anger for anger, and instead be people that return kindness when people actually may not deserve it. In that way, we don't look like the rest of the world, and we look more like who Jesus calls us to be. And so this morning and in these days ahead, remember Sister Marie, and before you say something mean, before you say something cruel, think better would be.